The desert stretched out in every direction, endless and indifferent. Dalton Cade had been checking his trap line for 3 hours when he heard the sound that changed everything, a scream that wasn't quite human. Raw and guttural, the kind that comes from someone who's been hurting for a long time. He found her in a dry wash between 2 red rock formations. A massive Apache woman with her leg caught in the iron teeth of a bear trap he'd never seen before. The metal had bitten deep into her calf and blood had darkened the sand around her. But when she saw him approach, she didn't beg. She reached for the knife at her side. That should have told him everything he needed to know about what was coming. Because saving her life was about to cost him his freedom. Dalton's horse had picked up the scent of blood first, ears flicking forward nervously as they moved through the rocky canyon. He'd been out here for 2 days, checking the trap line that kept him fed through the long stretches between work. The territory was disputed ground, claimed by settlers and Apache alike, which meant most people avoided it entirely. That's exactly why Dalton preferred it. Less company, fewer questions. The woman was sprawled on her side when he found her, one leg bent at an unnatural angle. The trap's serrated jaws locked around her calf just below the knee. The trap itself was anchored to a heavy chain, which was bolted to a boulder half buried in the sand. Whoever had set this wasn't trying to catch animals. They were trying to catch people. Her dark eyes tracked him as he dismounted, one hand still gripping her knife despite the obvious pain radiating through her body. Her breathing was shallow, controlled, the way someone breathes when they've been fighting agony for hours and refuse to give in. She wore traditional Apache clothing, leather and beadwork, and a bone necklace that marked her as someone important. Her black hair was matted with dust and sweat. Dalton raised both hands slowly, showing he was unarmed, though his own knife hung at his belt. He didn't speak. Words rarely helped in situations like this. Instead, he moved carefully around the trap, studying the mechanism. It was new, well-made, designed to hold without killing. That detail bothered him more than he wanted to admit. The woman's eyes narrowed as he knelt beside her leg, and she said something in Apache, sharp and warning. He didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear enough. Touch me and die. He met her gaze, held it for a long moment, then reached for the trap anyway. She could stab him if she wanted, but if he didn't get her out of this thing soon, infection would do what the metal couldn't. The release mechanism was stiff, crusted with dried blood from previous victims. Dalton worked it carefully, aware of every movement, every breath. The woman watched him with an intensity that made his skin prickle, her knife hand trembling slightly from blood loss and exhaustion. When the jaws finally opened with a wet, grinding sound, she gasped, the first real sign of vulnerability she'd shown. Blood flowed freely from the wounds, and Dalton pulled the bandana from his neck, wrapping it tight around her calf. She let him, which surprised him more than anything else. Her eyes were starting to lose focus, her body finally giving in to the trauma it had been fighting. He needed to move her, needed to get her somewhere with clean water and shelter. But as he lifted her onto his horse, one thought kept circling through his mind like a vulture. Someone had set that trap deliberately. In Apache territory, designed to catch exactly what it caught, and whoever set it might still be watching. Dalton secured her across the saddle, one arm keeping her from sliding as the horse picked its way through the rocky terrain. Her weight was substantial, all muscle and bone, and her head lolled against his chest as consciousness slipped in and out. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped. He needed shelter, water, and time, 3 things this territory didn't offer freely. The nearest water source was a spring he'd used 2 days ago, tucked into a canyon wall about 3 miles west. It wasn't much, barely enough to fill a canteen, but it was clean and the overhang above it provided shade. More importantly, it was hidden. If someone was hunting Apache in this area, they'd be watching the main trails and obvious camps. The ride took longer than it should have. He kept the horse to a walk, scanning the ridgelines for movement, for the glint of metal or the unnatural stillness that meant someone was watching. The woman drifted in and out, sometimes murmuring words he didn't understand, sometimes going rigid with pain when the horse's gait jostled her leg. When they finally reached the spring, the sun had passed its peak, and shadows were starting to stretch across the canyon floor. Dalton dismounted carefully, easing her down and propping her against the rock wall where the overhang provided shade. Her eyes opened briefly, unfocused and glassy with fever that was already beginning to set in. He worked quickly, building a small fire with dried mesquite, heating water in his dented tin cup. The wounds needed cleaning before infection took root. When he unwrapped the makeshift bandage, the damage was worse than he'd thought. The trap's teeth had torn through muscle, and he could see white bone beneath the shredded flesh. She came fully awake when he poured the hot water over the wounds, her hand shooting out to grip his wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes locked onto his, wide and fierce despite the pain, and she said something that sounded like a warning or a curse. He didn't pull away, just met her gaze and kept working. The sun was dropping toward the horizon when he finally finished wrapping her leg with strips torn from his extra shirt. She'd passed out again, her breathing shallow but steady. Dalton sat back against the rock wall, exhaustion hitting him like a physical weight. His hands were stained with her blood, and his shirt was ruined. That's when he noticed the tracks. Fresh prints in the soft sand near the spring. Boot prints, not moccasins. 3 different sets, maybe 4, all leading east, the same direction he'd come from. They'd been here recently within the last few hours. Whoever had set that trap knew about this spring. They knew the routes. They were hunting methodically. Dalton looked at the unconscious woman, then back at the tracks. The smart thing would be to leave her here with water and supplies, then disappear before whoever made those tracks came back. The smart thing would be to ride away and forget he'd ever seen her. He was still trying to convince himself to do the smart thing when he heard horses approaching from the east. Multiple horses, moving fast, and they weren't trying to be quiet about it. Dalton moved fast, dragging the woman deeper into the overhang's shadow and covering her with his bedroll. He kicked sand over the bloodstains near the spring, scattered the fire, and positioned himself at the canyon's narrow entrance with his rifle. If they were looking for her, they'd have to go through him first, and if they were just passing through, he'd let them pass. 4 riders appeared at the canyon mouth, their horses lathered and breathing hard. They weren't Apache. They were white men, rough-looking, the kind who made their living on the wrong side of territorial law. The lead rider was thick-bodied with a scarred face, and he carried a rifle across his saddle with the ease of someone who used it often. They spotted Dalton immediately and reined up hard, hands moving toward weapons. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the scarred man smiled, showing missing teeth. "Saw your tracks," he said, voice rough as sand. "Thought we'd check who's using our water." "Didn't see any claim markers," Dalton replied, keeping his rifle low but ready. "Don't need markers out here. Just need to know who belongs and who don't." The man's eyes moved past Dalton, scanning the overhang. "You alone?" "That's right." "Funny. Tracks said 2 horses came in. Only see 1 now." Dalton didn't respond. The lie hung between them, obvious and dangerous. One of the other riders, younger with a thin mustache, shifted in his saddle and pointed toward the overhang. "There's blood on them rocks." The scarred man's smile widened. "You wouldn't happen to have found something of ours, would you? Big Apache woman, probably hurt bad. We've been tracking her since yesterday. She stepped right into our trap just like we planned." So there it was. These weren't random trappers. They were hunting Kiona specifically, and they'd done it deliberately. The question was why. Apache women didn't have bounties. Killing them only brought more trouble than it was worth, unless this wasn't about money. "Haven't seen anyone," Dalton said. The scarred man spat into the dirt. "You're a poor liar, friend. We can track as good as any Apache, and those prints lead right to where you're standing." He glanced at his companions, some silent signal passing between them. "Now we can do this easy or hard. Easy is you step aside and let us collect what's ours. Hard is we take her anyway and you don't walk out of this canyon." Dalton's thumb found the hammer of his rifle. 4 against 1 weren't odds he liked, but the canyon was narrow enough that they couldn't spread out. They'd have to come at him in a line, and the first man through would die. The second probably would too. The question was whether he could reload fast enough for the third. Before he could decide, a sound echoed down the canyon that made all 5 men freeze. It was distant, but unmistakable, dozens of horses moving at a gallop, hooves thundering against hard ground. And mixed with the sound of horses was something else. Voices, calling out in Apache. Too many to count. The scarred man's face went pale. He jerked his horse around, nearly colliding with the rider behind him. "Move!" he shouted. They scattered like spooked cattle, whipping their horses back the way they'd come. Within seconds, they were gone, leaving only dust and the fading sound of panicked hoofbeats. Dalton turned slowly, looking toward the source of the approaching sound. The Apache voices were getting closer, spreading out across the territory in what sounded like a search pattern. They were looking for something, or someone. Behind him, beneath the bedroll, Kiona stirred and spoke for the first time in hours. Her voice was weak but clear. "They come for me," she said in accented English. "And now they find you." The Apache warriors appeared on the canyon rim like shadows materializing from stone. 15, maybe 20 of them, all mounted and armed. They didn't charge down immediately. They simply spread out along the high ground, surrounding the entire canyon with the patience of men who knew their prey had nowhere to run. Dalton kept his rifle ready but didn't raise it. Shooting now would be suicide, and more importantly, it would guarantee they'd never let him explain. Kiona struggled to sit up behind him, pushing the bedroll aside. She called out something in Apache, her voice stronger than it had been an hour ago, and several of the warriors shifted in their saddles. One rider moved forward, guiding his horse down the steep canyon wall with practiced ease. He was massive, broader across the shoulders than any man Dalton had ever seen, wearing traditional Apache clothing and a war chief's headdress that marked him as someone of significant rank. His face was weathered and hard, eyes like flint as they fixed on Dalton with an intensity that made his skin crawl. The chief reached the canyon floor and dismounted, moving toward them with the coiled readiness of someone who'd killed more men than he could count. Kiona spoke quickly, gesturing toward Dalton, toward her bandaged leg, explaining something that made the chief's expression shift from fury to something more complicated. He knelt beside Kiona, examining her leg with surprising gentleness, his large hands careful as they touched the makeshift bandages. Then he stood and turned to face Dalton fully for the first time. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear. "You saved my daughter. Daughter." The word hit Dalton like a physical blow. He'd pulled the chief's daughter out of a trap, treated her wounds, spent hours alone with her. In any culture, that carried weight. In Apache culture, he had no idea what it meant, but the chief's expression suggested it was significant. "Found her in a trap," Dalton said carefully. "Didn't know who she was. Just knew she needed help. The men who set trap. You see them? 4 of them came through here. Left when they heard you coming." The chief's jaw tightened, and he spoke rapidly in Apache to the warriors on the rim. Several of them immediately wheeled their horses and disappeared, presumably to track the men who'd escaped. When the chief turned back to Dalton, his expression had shifted again, this time to something that looked almost like respect. "I am Nietzsche. This is Kiona, my eldest daughter." He paused, studying Dalton with those flint-hard eyes. "You could have left her, could have taken what you want, and gone. Why you stay?" Dalton glanced at Kiona, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. The honest answer was that he didn't know. The smart answer was that he'd been planning to leave when the riders showed up. But something in Nietzsche's gaze demanded truth, not strategy. "Didn't seem right to leave her," he said finally. Nietzsche nodded slowly, as if this answer confirmed something he'd already suspected. Then he said something that made Dalton's stomach drop. "You touch my daughter. You save her life. You stay with her when warriors come." Nietzsche's voice was measured, formal, as if reciting something important. "By our law, by our tradition, you have claim to her now, and she has claim to you." Dalton's mouth went dry. "I didn't claim anything. I just helped her. Does not matter what you mean. Matters what you do." Nietzsche's expression hardened. "You are outsider. You do not know our ways, but now you must learn them." He gestured toward Kiona. "Tomorrow, when sun is high, you will marry my daughter. This is not request. This is law." The canyon suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. Dalton looked at Kiona, searching for some sign that this was a misunderstanding, that the chief was testing him. But her face was carefully neutral, revealing nothing. "And if I refuse?" Dalton asked quietly. Nietzsche's smile was cold. "Then you dishonor her, dishonor me, dishonor my people, and we do not let dishonor walk away." They rode to the Apache village in a formation that made Dalton's position clear. He wasn't a prisoner exactly, but he wasn't free either. Warriors flanked him on all sides, and Kiona rode beside him on a horse her father had brought, her injured leg carefully positioned to avoid pressure. She hadn't spoken since they left the canyon, and Dalton hadn't pushed. What was there to say? The village appeared in a wide valley protected by steep red cliffs on 3 sides. Wickiups made from branches and hide dotted the landscape, smoke rising from cooking fires. Women stopped their work to watch the procession, and children ran alongside the horses until their mothers called them back. Everyone knew something significant was happening. Dalton could feel their eyes on him, measuring, judging. They brought him to a larger wiki up near the center of the village. Nietzsche dismounted and gestured for Dalton to follow. Inside, the space was surprisingly cool, the thick walls keeping out the afternoon heat. Woven mats covered the ground, and weapons hung from the support pole's lances, bows, a rifle. "Sit," Nietzsche commanded, and Dalton sat. The chief poured water from a clay vessel, offering it to Dalton first, then drinking himself. It was a gesture of respect, Dalton realized, though what he'd done to earn it remained unclear. "You want to know why men hunt my daughter," Nietzsche said. It wasn't a question. "Crossed my mind. Kiona is warrior, best rider in tribe. She scout our territory, watch for dangers." Nietzsche's expression darkened. 3 weeks ago, she find men building structures on our land. Not homes, pens, places to keep people. He paused, letting that sink in. Slave traders. They take Apache, take anyone they can catch, sell them south of the border. Dalton's jaw tightened. He'd heard rumors of such operations, but they were supposed to be further south, deeper into lawless territory. If they were setting up this far north, that meant they were getting bolder, more organized. Kiona destroy their pens, free the people they already catch. They very angry. Nietzsche's smile was grim. So they set trap, not for animals, for her. They learn her routes, where she ride. They wait. And if I hadn't found her, they come back, take her, sell her. Or worse. Nietzsche met his eyes. You save her from fate worse than bear trap. This is why you marry her. Not punishment. Honor. The word hung in the air between them. Honor. As if marriage to a woman he'd known for less than a day was somehow honorable. As if he'd had any choice in the matter. "What if she doesn't want this?" Dalton asked. "You ask her yourself." Nietzsche stood and pulled back the entrance flap. "She waits outside. You talk, learn each other. Tomorrow you marry, but today you decide if you run or stay." He left, and after a moment, Kiona entered. She moved carefully, favoring her injured leg, but refusing to show weakness. In the dimmer light of the wickiup, Dalton could see her face more clearly: high cheekbones, strong jaw, eyes that missed nothing. She wasn't beautiful in any conventional sense. She was striking, powerful, and completely at ease in her own skin. She sat across from him, close enough that he could smell the sage smoke that clung to her clothing and the copper scent of blood that still lingered from her wounds. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "You could run. Tonight. My father would track you, but you could try. Would he catch me? Yes. No hesitation. But he would respect the attempt." Dalton studied her face, looking for some hint of what she wanted. "Do you want me to run?" Kiona's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes, something complex that might have been hope or fear, or both. "What I want does not matter. Law is law. It matters to me." That got a reaction. Her eyes widened slightly, and for the first time since he'd found her in that trap, she looked genuinely surprised. She studied him with new intensity, as if seeing him for the first time, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "Those men, the ones who trapped me, they still out there. They still hunt my people." She paused. "You marry me, you make alliance with my tribe. You become part of something bigger than yourself. Or you run, stay alone, stay safe." Her gaze held his. "What kind of man are you?" Dalton didn't sleep that night. He sat outside the wickiup they'd given him, watching the stars wheel overhead and thinking about all the ways his life had gone sideways in the past day. He could run. His horse was tied near the eastern edge of the village, and the guards Nietzsche had posted were good, but not invisible. He'd slipped past better men before, but Kiona's question kept echoing in his head. "What kind of man are you?" He'd been running for 3 years. Ever since the ranch burned and his brother died in the fire that Dalton had started by accident, a lamp knocked over during an argument he couldn't even remember the cause of anymore. He'd run from the guilt, from the family that blamed him, from the woman who'd been promised to him before the smoke cleared and she saw what he'd done. He'd run until running became easier than staying anywhere long enough to care. Kiona wasn't asking him to run. She was asking him to stay, to be part of something, to matter to people who had no reason to trust him but were willing to try. When dawn broke, Dalton walked to Nietzsche's wickiup and found the chief already awake, sharpening a knife with methodical strokes. Nietzsche looked up, studied his face, and nodded once as if Dalton had already spoken. "You stay. I stay," Dalton confirmed. "Good. Then we prepare." Naicha stood, sheathing the knife. Ceremony is at midday. Before then, you learn what it means to marry a Apache woman. The next few hours passed in a blur. Naicha explained the ceremony's significance, how it bound not just two people but two families, two ways of life. He gave Dalton traditional clothing to wear, leather leggings and a shirt decorated with beadwork that had belonged to Naicha's father. The honor wasn't lost on Dalton, nor was the weight of expectation that came with it. Kiona appeared mid-morning, accompanied by older women who'd prepared her for the ceremony. Someone had braided her long black hair and woven small feathers into it. She wore a dress of soft doeskin decorated with intricate patterns, and despite the bandage still visible on her calf, she moved with grace and dignity. When her eyes met Dalton's, something passed between them, a recognition of shared uncertainty perhaps, or the beginning of something neither of them had words for yet. "You look different," she said, gesturing at his Apache clothing. "So do you." A hint of a smile touched her lips. Scared? Terrified. This time she did smile, brief, but genuine. "Good. Me too." The admission surprised him. She'd seemed so composed, so certain. But now, standing close enough that he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands kept moving to adjust the dress she clearly wasn't comfortable wearing, he realized she was as far outside her comfort zone as he was. "Can I ask you something?" Dalton said. "Yes. When you asked what kind of man I am, what kind were you hoping for?" Kiona was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. When she spoke, her voice was soft enough that only he could hear. "One who stays. One who fights. One who sees me as partner, not possession." She paused. "One who chooses to be here, not forced." "I'm choosing," Dalton said. "Why?" It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. "Because I'm tired of running. Because what you said about being part of something bigger, I used to have that. Lost it. Maybe this is a chance to find it again." He met her eyes. "And because you deserved better than to die in that trap alone." Kiona's expression softened, and for the first time, he saw vulnerability behind the warrior's mask. She reached out, her hand hovering near his for a moment before she let it drop. "Then we find it together." A horn sounded across the village, low and resonant. Naiche appeared at the wiki-up entrance, his face solemn. "It is time." The entire tribe gathered in the center of the village, forming a wide circle around the ceremonial space. Warriors stood at attention with lances planted in the ground, their faces painted for the occasion. Women held children who were too young to understand, but old enough to sense the importance of what was happening. Even the dog seemed to know this was significant. Lying quiet at the edges of the crowd, Naiche stood at the circle's center, wearing his full war chief regalia, the feathered headdress, bone breastplate, and ceremonial paint that marked him as leader. He raised one hand, and the murmuring crowd fell silent. When he spoke, his voice carried across the village with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He began in Apache, the words rhythmic and formal, explaining to his people what was happening and why. Dalton caught fragments, the words for honor, for debt, for alliance. When Naiche switched to English, it was clearly for Dalton's benefit, making sure he understood what he was agreeing to. "Kiona, daughter of Naiche, warrior of our people. Dalton Cade, outsider who saved her life. You stand before tribe, before ancestors, before the land itself." He gestured for them to step forward. "Kiona, you accept this man as husband, as protector, as partner in all things." Kiona's voice was steady. "I accept." "Dalton Cade, you accept this woman as wife, as warrior, as partner in all things? You accept her people as your people, her enemies as your enemies, her honor as your honor?" The weight of those words settled over Dalton like physical pressure. This wasn't just marriage. It was adoption into the tribe, with all the responsibilities and dangers that came with it. The slave traders who'd hunted Kiona would now hunt him. The tribe's wars would be his wars. There was no halfway with this commitment. He looked at Kiona, standing proud despite her injured leg, and thought about the question she'd asked him. "What kind of man are you?" "I accept," Dalton said. Naiche nodded, then gestured for Dalton to kneel. When he did, Kiona extended her hand and he took it. Her palm was calloused from years of riding and fighting, warm and solid in his grip. Naiche placed his own massive hands over both of theirs. "Then by our law, you are bound. What the tribe witnesses, no man can break." The crowd erupted in calls and whoops, warriors striking their lances against the ground in rhythm. But the celebration was cut short by a sound that made every warrior reach for weapons. A gunshot, distant but clear, from the eastern ridge. Then another, and another. Naichi's expression went cold. He barked orders in Apache, and warriors scattered, some running for horses, others taking defensive positions around the village. Women grabbed children and moved them toward the protected wiki-ups. In seconds, the celebration had transformed into organized chaos. "The slave traders," Kiona said, her hand tightening around Dalton's. "They come now during ceremony when they think we are distracted." A young warrior ran up to Naiche, speaking rapidly. Naiche's face darkened, and he turned to Dalton. "They attack from 3 sides. Try to draw us out. Divide our forces." His eyes were hard. "You just become part of this tribe. Now you prove it." He thrust a lance into Dalton's hands, the weapon heavy and unfamiliar. Dalton had never used a lance before, had barely held one. But as Kiona moved to his side, grabbing her own bow despite her injury, he understood what was being asked. This wasn't a test. It was survival. "Can you ride?" Kiona asked him. "Yes." "Can you fight?" Dalton thought about his brother, about the fire, about all the running he'd done from violence and consequences. Then he looked at the warriors preparing to defend their families, at Kiona's determined face, at the village that had just accepted him as one of their own. "I'm about to find out," he said. Kiona's smile was fierce. "Good. Then we fight together." They ran for the horses as another volley of gunshots echoed across the valley, and Dalton realized that marrying into this tribe meant more than ceremony and tradition. It meant standing between the people he'd just sworn to protect and the men who wanted to destroy them. And he had about 5 minutes to figure out how to use a lance before those men arrived. The slave traders came hard and fast, 12 riders spreading out across the eastern approach, firing rifles as they charged. They were counting on chaos, on panic, on the tribe being unprepared during the ceremony. What they got instead was disciplined warriors who'd been fighting longer than most of these men had been alive. Dalton rode beside Kiona, his horse straining to keep pace with hers despite her injured leg. She handled her mount like it was part of her body, bow already drawn, releasing arrows with deadly precision. 2 riders fell before they got within 100 yards of the village, and the remaining attackers scattered, looking for cover in the rocky terrain. That's when Naiche made his move. He'd positioned warriors on both flanks, hidden in the draws and gullies that marked the valley's edges. When the slave traders broke formation, the Apache warriors emerged, cutting off their retreat and driving them toward the center where Dalton and a dozen other riders waited. The scarred man from the canyon was among them. Dalton recognized him immediately, saw the moment of recognition flash across his face too. The man wheeled his horse toward Dalton, raising his rifle, and Dalton did the only thing he could think of. He threw the lance. He'd never thrown a lance before. Didn't know the proper technique or the right angle, but desperation made up for skill, and the weapon flew true enough. It caught the scarred man's horse in the chest, and the animal went down hard, throwing its rider into the rocks. The man's rifle discharged into the air, and before he could recover, 3 Apache warriors were on him. The fight lasted less than 10 minutes. The slave traders, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, tried to surrender. Naiche didn't give them the chance. These men had set traps for his people, had planned to sell them like livestock. There would be no mercy, no prisoners. When the dust settled, 12 bodies lay scattered across the valley floor, and not a single Apache had fallen. Kiona dismounted carefully, favoring her injured leg, and walked to where Dalton stood beside the dead horse. His lance was still buried in its chest, blood darkening the sand around it. She pulled the weapon free and handed it back to him, her expression unreadable. "You throw like someone who has never held lance before," she said. "I haven't. But you throw anyway." Didn't have much choice. Kiona studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "This is what it means to be part of tribe. You do what must be done, even when you do not know how." She touched his arm briefly, a gesture that felt more intimate than anything that had happened during the ceremony. "You stay. You fight. You prove my father right to demand this marriage." "Is that what you wanted?" Dalton asked. "For me to prove something?" "No." Kiona's voice softened. "I want partner who chooses to stay even when it is hard. You could have run last night, could have refused ceremony, could have hidden when fighting started." She met his eyes. "But you stay. This is what I want." Naiche approached, blood on his hands and satisfaction on his face. The men who hunt my daughter are dead. The ones who escaped earlier, my warriors will find them. He looked at Dalton with something approaching approval. You fight poorly, throw like child, but you stand where other men run. He clapped a heavy hand on Dalton's shoulder. This makes you worthy husband for my daughter. That night, as the tribe celebrated their victory and the completion of the ceremony, Dalton sat with Kiona outside their wickiup, watching the fire burn low. Her hand rested in his, comfortable and certain. For the first time in 3 years, he wasn't thinking about running. He was thinking about staying. About the woman beside him who'd challenged him to be better than he'd been. About the tribe that had accepted him not for who he'd been before, but for who he chose to become. No more running? Kiona asked quietly. Dalton squeezed her hand. No more running. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where courage and destiny collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.